gospel light would never have shined upon had Paul and Silas not been locked in that jail, surrendered to their service. If we are truly to live the surrendered life, we must be willing to offer ourselves in service even in the most difficult and trying of times. Most of us are willing to serve when everything is going good and when the road is not difficult. Most of us are willing to serve when what we're doing kind of fits into the wheelhouse of what we like to do. But you know where the true measure of surrender comes in? It's when there's that thing we don't like to do. It's service when times are hard. It's service when things are difficult. It's the struggle to serve. That's where surrender really comes into play. That's where that proverbial rubber meets that proverbial road and says, am I truly surrendered? Anybody can surrender when it's easy and the sacrifice is light. It's when it's hard that our efforts really come together to decide, are we truly surrendered? It's easier to give to missions than it is to witness to our neighbor across the street. The question is, are we surrendered if we're unwilling to go? Are we surrendered if we're unwilling to be in service in the hard times? If you have truly experienced conversion under Jesus Christ as Savior, then you have also accepted His authority as Lord. And it's at that point that our surrender becomes the main issue. Paul and Silas' daily activity on this day led them to the prison. The commission of Jesus Christ encourages us that as we go about our daily lives, we should make disciples of all peoples. On this day, their road took them to the prison. Your road may take you to the bank to find out there's no money in your account. Your road may take you to work and it may be the worst day you have ever had at work. Your road may take you up to see a family member and they just hurt you. And it's at those points where surrender is most difficult. But Paul and Silas reveal to us that the work of God is not only completed in the joys of living, but it often finds its fulfillment in the darkness of oppression and suffering. That's where the work of God finds fulfillment, through the difficult times as well as the good. And our surrender must occur at all times. In whatever state you find yourself, the surrendered life is one that constantly offers itself in service. The surrendered life follows God's direction. The surrendered life offers itself in service. But also the surrendered life produces life-changing results. The surrendered life produces life-changing results. We look at this passage, we see the surrender of Paul and Silas to God, and it produces three measurable results. The first is simple. It produces an earthquake. Now, at this moment an earthquake happens. Everybody's chains break off. Everybody is free. That's the first result. The second result is it resulted in a fruitful prison ministry. What do you mean? Well, the prisoners were changed by the surrender of Paul and Silas. Their lives were changed. The worst of the worst were changed. Now, how do you know that, preacher? That's another one I'm glad you asked on. Because Paul and Silas don't hold these guys back with a peacemaker and a Tommy gun. They don't grab the prisoners have the opportunity to get away, they take it. They'll jump a fence, they'll dig a tunnel, they'll slip out in the laundry, they'll fake themselves out as a lawyer, whatever. But if they can get out the door, they will. And yet because of the ministry of Paul and Silas, these prisoners stayed. And the third result we see is that there is the salvation of the jailer and his family. A surrendered life always produces life-changing results. That doesn't mean everybody you witness to is going to get saved, and it doesn't mean that every time you pray you're going to see the heavens open and God just drop an answer down right in front of your face. It doesn't mean that when you're surrendered things are always going to be good, or even that you will get the benefit of seeing the result of your work. But the Scriptures are clear that whatever we sow, we will reap. And if we have sowed a surrendered life, we will reap a successful, life-changing, resulting harvest. Many of you have heard me tell the story of Edward Kimball. Edward Kimball was a Sunday school teacher in Chicago at Congregational Church. Edward Kimball was praying one Saturday afternoon. He felt compelled by the Lord to go and visit a boy who'd been showing up in his Sunday school class. And so he surrendered himself to God that afternoon, and he went to where this boy worked in the shoe store. And he inquired of that young man's soul. At 17 years of age, Dwight Lyman Moody accepted the call of Jesus Christ to salvation. D.L. Moody would go on to lead literally hundreds of thousands of people into the kingdom of Jesus Christ. The most harsh critics of D.L. Moody are quoted as saying this: the man was so convinced of the need to reach the lost soul that he is personally responsible for the decrease in hell's population by 1 million people. That's his harshest critic, that had to admit that his commitment to the cross led 1 million people out of hell's bondage. One afternoon of surrender by Edward Kimball. But you know, the story of D.L. Moody doesn't just go from Edward Kimball. Yeah, he led him to Christ. But Moody had a wealth of influences. Moody's greatest influence in how to do ministry, how to care for people, didn't come from Edward Kimball. It came from a man named Oliver Everett. D.L. Moody's father died suddenly when he was a young boy. And they lived in a part of northern Massachusetts where they were about 3 miles past the end of the world. Poor, rural, hard to farm. A mother and a slew of kids, D.L. Moody right in the middle of it. Hungry, tired, trying with all they could to hold on to what they had. And a Unitarian pastor named Reverend Oliver Everett was the one that came to them and showed them the love and compassion of Jesus Christ that led his mother into faith, Jesus Christ. It was the surrender to his calling of Oliver Everett that showed D.L. Moody the love of God for the first time. And he would in turn show the love of God to person after person, in country after country, to the point where his ministry is still bringing souls into the kingdom today. Moody has been dead 111 years. And the impact of his ministry still goes forward. You know what that means? That means the impact of a surrendered Saturday by Edward Kimball still goes forward. The surrender of a Unitarian pastor on the backwoods of nowhere in a hill in Massachusetts still goes forward. The surrendered life always produces life-changing results. surrender to his calling. Paul accepted the beating and imprisonment because of his surrender to God's will. Paul ministered to the prisoners because of his surrender to Christ's service. Paul stayed in the prison when the earthquake set him free because he was surrendered to Christ's commission. Later we find Paul returns to the prison with the jailer because he is surrendered to the authorities God has placed over him. And the results: a freed girl, a changed prison, a converted jailer and his family, and a church that was planted and protected by the authorities, all because of one surrendered life. The life of surrender is truly the life of faith we are all called to live. When we trust in God and surrender ourselves to Him, our faith grows. And when we face trials and difficulties, our trust in God strengthens our faith. As we trust God in the midst of the most difficult times and surrender ourselves to Him, our faith is exercised and it grows. This passage is the living illustration of Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. That we would trust in the Lord with all our hearts, lean not to our own understandings, acknowledge Him in all of our ways, and He shall direct our paths. When we seek to rely on our own best judgment, we remove our trust in God from the equation and our faith weakens. Had Paul blurted out right off the bat, "I am a Roman citizen," prisoners to hell, jailer to hell, church to persecution. Paul didn't rely on his own best judgment. Be honest. They're coming at you with sticks. If you've got one phrase that'll make them stop, how many of you using our own best judgment would say, "I'll use that phrase"? Be honest. It's self-preservation. Man, it goes against everything in our being to surrender to God's will in times of suffering rather than try to figure it out ourselves. And yet that's exactly what we're called to do. Surrender.